guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. Okay. I know this is square, but like it fits. It's perfect for steeping. At the end of the last video, I told you that we would talk about the specifics of when I covered this book. So as promised, here we are. So the paper I used was some of the Pepin paper. And basically it's like matte gift wrap. It's not thick paper. I would say it's thicker than copy paper, but not a lot thicker than copy paper. You back up a little bit because wow. Wow. I would say it is in the, I don't know, 28 pound-ish area. Full disclosure, it's confession time. There was a point in my life last year, early last year, I think I was getting a little cabin fever crazy from being inside all the time, which isn't a huge shift from my everyday normal life, but I think when you can't go out, it's different than when you can, but you choose not to. Does that make sense? At least that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. I might have bought more than my fair share of Pepin paper. Just saying, it was an issue. The placemats are basically the same paper, but in placemat form. You can get these on Amazon. I have some on my favorites list, I think in the Booksmithables section. I did not use any paper that had a coating on it. Case in point, can you see how these are shinier, like magazine style? I have not tried painting them with the varnish that I painted for this. So you can use any like matte varnish. I had Liquitex, I have Delta Creative, and I have the Deco Art or Americana, whichever one it's supposed to be. All of these worked. So these two are satin, and then the Liquitex is the matte. They both worked fine. But I only used the papers that felt like a matte finish, or you know, like didn't have a finish on them. I just figured the varnish would stick to it better. Here I am just talking smack, and I really don't know because I didn't try it. Making assumptions that might not actually have any weight to them. I did paint the back and the front. And then I thought, well, what if somebody doesn't have any Pepin paper? Because, I mean, most people probably don't have a problem with that. So I thought, well, what else could you use? I think all kinds of gift wrap would probably be okay as long as it's not too thick and heavy. You can use a thicker paper. It's just more difficult to fold when you do the foldovers. It just gets bulky and, you know, stuff. How long has it been? Can I have my tea yet? So I wouldn't use paper that's too hefty, too thick. Just for that reason, really. I think the thinner paper, I might be wrong here again, but I think the thicker paper might have more stress put on it in the folds too. It's like there's more fibers or something to fold over, or in the hinge gaps. It just seems like it'd be more of a problem. Yeah. It sounds reasonable. Whether it is or not, I have no idea. The other thing that I wanted to say about this paper, and this goes for any kind of book binding. This is a general rule. You want to make sure that the grain of the paper is running parallel with the spine, running north and south this way. Sometimes you can see it. I can see it running in this direction. But another way to test it is you can just barely fold it in half in both directions. When you fold it with the grain, because this is with the grain, because the grain is running this way. So when you fold it this way, it will have less resistance than if you turn it this way and you are trying to fold it against the grain. So the grain's running this way and the fold is this way. So there's fibers running this way. So when you're trying to fold it like this, it's like binding them up. But when it's in this direction and the fibers are going all this way, it's easier. I'm not like trying to fold it, but when I bend the paper in half, that's about the width of the curl. And then if you do it this way and you hold it this way, you see how it's bigger? So that would be more resistance. With that being said, then you would want to cut it so that it would be in this direction when you covered it. Couldn't be like this, because if it's like this, you're going to end up getting cracking, because the cover is going to be bent back and forth as you open it up, right? So you want the fibers in the paper to be running with that fold, because then it can fold in between those fibers. But if you're trying to fold, if it was like this and you're trying to open it up and it's going against those, it's just going to break those fibers quicker. Does that make sense? That's why you want the grain running in this direction. All right, and then all I did was I took a paintbrush and the varnish and I painted the back side and let that dry, and then I flipped it over and I painted the front side and let it dry. And then I just printed out an image onto just some regular paper, and that's what you see in the video now. Just a design, a pattern design I have on my Etsy store, and I printed it just on regular paper that you put through the printer. It was a little heavier than standard copy paper. I think it was like 24 pound or something, or 20, it's either 24 or 28. It was somewhere in there, but it was just regular copy paper. But it was made for inkjet printers, and so it was a higher quality paper. And I just use the higher quality paper because I get a clearer image when I print on it. It didn't really matter what paper it was per se. It's just I wanted to have a nice clear print. So that's why I used it. I got it at a thrift store, and I think it was made in like the 80s or something. And honestly, I don't know if they still make it. Well, maybe the 90s. Yeah, because there's we had computers in the 80s. And it says it's 26 pound. That's some serious 1990s stuff going on right there, let me tell you. Anyway, that was a long explanation for that. I did make sure which direction the grain runs in, and 99.9999% of the time, if you have an 8.5 by 11, or if you have A4 paper, the grain runs with the length of the paper. So it's long grained is what it's called. If you had a piece of paper that was this size and the grain ran in this direction, that would be called short grained paper. But most copy paper is long grained, just the way it is. So that was the answer to that. The little headbands that I used for the top and the bottom was this woven cotton trim. I honestly don't even know what it's technically called. It's 1/2 inch wide. I think you can buy it at most fabric stores, sewing supply stores, whatever. It's obviously not proper headband material, but it worked out perfect for this. So this is the book that you're probably seeing snippets of me making. These boards have little bamboo skewers, like such, glued to the very, very edge of these boards. And so I took a board, this is just chipboard, and I coated it with like shipping tape so that the moisture from the glue, because when you glue all this together, there's going to be moisture coming through the boards. So if you tape the boards, then that helps these things not to warp, because you really don't want your the boards that you're using to clamp your book together to warp. It kind of defeats the purpose of them being flat. So if you tape them, then that helps. But then you can just kind of put them up against a flat surface, take a bamboo skewer, and you glue that to the very, very edge. And you could take another one and hold it in place until it dries. And what that does is when you put these onto a book, after it's all glued together, then those bamboo skewers fit into those hinge gaps, and it helps keep the shape of those hinge gaps after you've taken your bone folder and pushed those down. And that's important, and I'll show you why. Let me take out the plastic. This is just transparency film. It's nice because you can wipe glue off of it. So anyway, what was I talking about? Okay, so this hinge gap here, where these bamboo skewers press down and hold that down, like I said, that's important, because when you glue on your cover to your text block and you are painting all the way to the edge of your papers, like I showed, you paint all the way to the edge of, you know, your text block. Then when you put the cover on, this hinge gap area that we allowed for when we were putting the cover together, that's just basically the cover material. Part of that will get attached to the underside of the end sheet. I'll get my pointer here. So all of this is glued. All of this down into that crevice is all glued to the cover. And see how there's your hinge gap. The end paper is glued to the underside of that hinge gap. So if you didn't put something in there to take up the gap and to make sure that everything was nice and snugged down while it was gluing, then it's possible that that glue could release. Let's say you just did it like this and like this, and you put a clamp on there. Maybe you can see the gap in there. So there's gaps in there. There's nothing that would hold the cover, the book cover, down into those little hinge gap recesses so that the glue would stick where it's supposed to stick. And then when you opened up your book, you would have all this would be open. So it would be open all the way from hinge gap to hinge gap, and it would just be real super loosey-goosey, and you don't want that. There are reasons, but I won't go through all the reasons. But anyway, it's bad. You don't want it. For very, very extremely little money, you can remedy that situation. If you're binding a great big huge book, you could get, you know, a bigger dowel rod, something. But you can get all these kinds of things at like the Dollar Tree. And then, like I said, this is just chipboard. So basically free stuff. When I printed out this paper, I printed it with a little rectangle and a blank space so that I could gold foil inside there. And I only have big letters right now. I need to get a set of smaller ones, but they're just really expensive, so I could only afford one set, and this was the set I got. So I could only fit in here span/ing, Spanish English. I'll know what it means. But I think it turned out really super cute. This paper right here it's thicker than tissue paper, but it's like mulberry paper. It's really thin. There's also sets of mulberry paper that you can get on Amazon too. Again, on my Booksmithables list, there's some mulberry paper. And some of it will have like little flecks of like botanical material, or, you know, it's really cool because it usually does not even have a grain because it's handmade paper. And a lot of handmade paper does not have a grain because the fibers are just going all which way. So that doesn't matter so much about when you cut out your end sheets. You don't have to make sure usually about the grain because it doesn't matter. There is no grain. But I thought this one was cute. It had the little raindrops in the gold. The text block on this book was rather wonky, so getting it to fit inside of a cover was problematic at times because the text block wasn't square, but I did my best. So the paper worked, just the regular paper that I printed on worked just fine. You don't have to use, you know, the gift wrap, although the Pepin paper is fabulous. It's fabulous. The important thing when you're covering a book with paper, along with the paper grain running in the correct direction, is that you want to be aware of leaving a sufficient amount of space for the hinge gap. So in this instance, I left a 1/4 inch or 6.3 whatever millimeters. That is what I left. So when I was measuring for my gap that I was placing in between the covers, I measured the width of the spine of the text block from side to side, from shoulder to shoulder, they say. And then I added that 1/4 inch or 6.3, I think it's 3.5, to either side of that spine width measurement. My hands are itchy. Do you know what chilblains are? You guys know what those are? People can get them when it's like right before you get frostbite, you get chilblains. When your extremities are really cold, this is another side tangent, so you can fast forward through this if you don't want to understand why I'm itching my hands. When you're really cold, your body tries to preserve the important parts of your body. So your core, your heart, your brain, your lungs. So your body pretty much shuts off blood flow to, your extremities, because you can live without extremities. And then when you get warm, the blood rushes back into the vessels in your extremities. And when that blood rushes back, it creates pressure. And if you have a compromised vascular system, that pressure can burst some of those little vessels at the ends of your toes and your fingers and nose, ears. There's, depends on how cold you get or whatever. And I don't know if you can see how this hand is bigger, like my fingertips are bigger on this hand than they are on this hand. Maybe you can tell that these are bigger. And like I have fingerprints over here, but on here I don't. It's because this hand is swollen up and they've been much bigger than this before. But anyway, because of the cold weather, even though I'm not outside, I will still do the same thing. So when the blood rushes back into my hands, because I have Raynaud's and lupus and vasculitis and just whatever, when the blood rushes back, it creates a similar response that those chilblains would if you were about to be frostbitten and then you got inside real quick and you got warm and the blood rushed back. You could still get damage and little lesions to your toes and your fingers because, your vessels are damaged from the cold and then the blood rushes back in them and it, anyway. So, but it itches. When that happens, even if it only happens in one hand at a time, because apparently I have one problematic hand. This one's fine. It's like, so this hand is cool to the touch, not icy, but it's like my fingertips are cool. This hand is hot right now. I know, it's weird. It's really, really strange. So hopefully I won't get any lesions on the ends of my fingers from this. Sometimes I get them on my toes. Anyway, what were we even talking about? I don't even remember. Oh, hinge gap. When you're covering with paper, it's important to leave an adequate hinge gap, because if you don't leave an adequate hinge gap, when you go to open up the cover, it will create too much tension in here and it will crack the paper regardless of the grain running in the correct direction or not. It puts too much stress on the paper and it will end up failing over time quicker. When you go to the store to purchase let's say you're going to purchase a hardback book, a lot of times they are merely covered in paper. They're not usually covered in a honest to goodness book cloth. Sometimes they are. But if you're just going to go buy a book, they're usually just covered, in paper. This out of the way. So, case in point. This is covered in paper. That's all it is. It's coated paper, yes, but it's just paper. Even the box is covered in paper. Here's another one. This one, too. Coated paper, yes, but paper. The question I had, though, was could this be mimicked by just the random person, you or me, in a way to where we could just use paper and not have to worry about book cloth if we didn't want to? You get it. So after a little bit of experimentation, I was pleasantly surprised when I coated paper with the matte varnish. And I think it makes a pretty close facsimile to like a commercial paper that would cover a book. Is it going to last forever? I guess it depends on how hard you are on your books. But those things that we talked about, the grain direction, the sufficient hinge gap, those things are crucial to the longevity of a book cover. It'll probably last as long as a book that you would buy and that has a paper cover. This paper is probably a little thicker than the paper I used. So your mileage may vary, but that's about that. I wanted to cover both of these little dictionaries, but I didn't feel the need to get out the Bookcloth. I just didn't want to. I wanted to come up with some other options, and I think this is a viable option, especially if it's going to be little journals and stuff like that you're going to throw in your bag, or perhaps you're going to make a little book for a kid. You know, you want to be able to print out something specific and make a book cover. With Bookcloth, it's harder to do that. They can pick a color. I mean, you can go on to decorate it, but just not in the same way that you can customize printed paper. So perhaps this is something that you might want to try. Either get some gift wrap, or like I did with the Pepin paper, or just some regular paper, and print on it. Cover something that's not precious to you. Go to the thrift store and buy one of these little dictionaries. These were $1, so it wasn't going to hurt my feelings if it didn't work. That way you could test it out, open it up and go put it on a shelf for a while and get it out in a month and test it again, give it to a little kid. Give it to a little kid that's kind of ham-fisted and see if it survives the kid. I'm sure you could think of all kinds of ways to test out the longevity if that's something that you're worried about. The gold foiling, I used my hot gold foil machine that I got off of Amazon. It's on my list under tools, I believe. It works great. I haven't had any complaints whatsoever. I hope this answered a few of your questions that you had about the book I made. Feel free to ask any questions down below, and I will do my best to answer those. For those of you on Patreon, I will add a little download like this for if you want to try out this kind of a cover. That is uploaded at Patreon for both tiers. Happy freebie to you. But I guess that is going to be all. I hope everybody has an excellent weekend, and I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.